My hands were shaking as I stood in the marble hallway of the probate court building. It was February 14th, 2023, Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was holding an envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind of envelope that doesn't arrive in your mailbox, the kind that arrives with a man in a suit who asks you to sign for it. The letter inside said 3 words that would destroy everything my family had built on lies. She saw everything. But let me start 6 months earlier. Let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you how I learned that the people who break you are sometimes the ones who raised you, and how some people, the quiet, invisible ones, they're watching, always watching, waiting. I didn't know any of this yet, but I was about to discover that my grandmother had left me more than just money. She'd left me the truth. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old. I live in a modest apartment in Portland, Oregon, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, rent is $1,700 a month. I work as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company. The job pays okay. Not great. Okay. $58,000 a year. I have a 401k that I contribute to faithfully. I have 1 credit card that I pay off every month. I'm the kind of person who makes lists and checks things off. I'm the kind of person who worries quietly and alone. My family is from money. Old money. The kind of money that sits in trust funds and comes with expectations. The kind of money that, when you don't have it yourself, reminds you every single day that you're somehow less. My father is Richard Mitchell. He owns 3 commercial real estate companies. My mother is Catherine. She sits on the boards of 2 charities and owns a gallery in downtown Seattle. My brother, Daniel, is a corporate attorney who specializes in mergers and acquisitions. And then there's me. The family joke, and it was a joke, but it was also not a joke, was that I was the practical one. The one without ambition. The one who'd taken the safe route. I could see it in their eyes every holiday season when I'd show up in my Honda Civic and they'd pull up in their Tesla and Range Rovers. "How's that little apartment working out for you?" my mother would ask, smiling. She had a smile that could cut through steel. "Still enjoying that corporate job," my father would add, patting my shoulder like I was a child who'd done something cute. I never defended myself. That was the thing about growing up in that family. You learned early on that defending yourself was pointless. They weren't asking questions. They were making observations. My grandmother, though, my grandmother was different. Eleanor Grace Mitchell Chen had married my grandfather in 1958, back when that was still scandalous in our circles. She was the daughter of a Chinese-American diplomat. He was a white banker from New England. Together, they had my father and my uncle. Together, they built wealth. But Eleanor never forgot where she came from. Her mother had been an army nurse in World War II, a woman who'd seen blood and death and human suffering that would have broken most people into pieces. Eleanor inherited that strength. She wore it quietly, the way some people wear perfume. You could only detect it if you were close enough to pay attention. I was close. I was the only one who visited her regularly. Every other Sunday, without fail, I'd drive to her house on Queen Anne Hill in Seattle. It took me 3 hours. I'd bring her groceries. We'd sit in her kitchen. It was always in her kitchen, never the formal dining room, and we'd talk. We talked about everything and nothing. Books, the news, my job, her arthritis. The way the city was changing. She'd make me jasmine tea, and we'd sit while the afternoon light moved across the table. What I remember most was her hands. They were small, delicate, covered in age spots and the raised veins that come with 90 years of living. But they were strong. When she held mine, I could feel that strength. "You're going to be fine, Sarah," she told me once. We were sitting on her back porch, looking out at the sound. It was August, hot for Seattle. "Don't let them make you believe otherwise." "Let who make me believe what?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She just squeezed my hand. "The people who need you to be small, so they can feel big." I didn't understand what she meant then. I was 28. I thought she was just being philosophical. The way old people are. I was wrong. August 2022. My grandmother had a stroke. It happened on a Tuesday morning. She was in her house alone. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, no relation, despite the shared name, found her when Alina hadn't answered the door at their usual morning tea time. The stroke was massive. They said she'd been down for at least 4 hours before anyone found her. By the time the ambulance arrived, she'd lost most movement on her left side. She was still conscious, still Alina, but she was trapped in a body that wouldn't obey her commands. The family mobilized immediately. My father, Richard, took control. That was what Richard did. He took control. He called family meetings. He arranged for round-the-clock care. He hired the best neurologists in Washington state. He moved Alina to a private facility, the Harmony Gardens, overlooking Lake Washington, $3,000 a month even with the family discount. He also started making phone calls. To her financial advisor, to her attorney, to her insurance company. He was just making sure everything was in order, he told everyone. He was being a good son. I found out later that he was also ordering copies of her will. My mother, Catherine, visited Alina once. She said the medical equipment was depressing and the smell of the facility was disturbing. She sent flowers, white lilies, which are for funerals, and then found reasons not to return. My brother Daniel came twice. Both times he was on his phone, emailing clients, taking calls. He'd sit in Alina's room, not really present, just physically occupying the space while handling work on his laptop. But I went every day. I took 2 weeks off work, used up my vacation days. Then I started taking half days, going in at 10 a.m., staying at Alina's facility until 6 p.m. I'd read to her. She could hear, thank God, she could understand. I'd hold her hand, I'd tell her about my day, what I'd seen on the drive up. It was in early September, when my phone started ringing constantly. It was my father. "Sarah, we need to talk about your grandmother's finances," he said. We were on the phone, him in his office in Seattle, me in Alina's room, trying to keep my voice low. "What about them?" I asked. "She's going to need better care. The best doctors, physical therapy. We're looking at possibly $1 million a year." I felt my stomach drop. Is her insurance not covering it? "Some of it, not all. We need to talk about liquidating some of her assets." "She has assets?" I asked. There was a pause, a long one. "Sarah, there are things about your grandmother's financial situation that you don't understand." "Then explain them to me." "It's complicated, and frankly, it's not your concern. It's a family matter, a legal matter." "She's my grandmother," I said. "Yes, and that's why I'm calling you as a courtesy. We're going to need to make some decisions. I need you to understand that." He hung up before I could respond. That same week, my brother called. "Listen," Daniel said, and I could hear the careful tone in his voice, the one he used with clients. "Dad's getting stressed about Grandma's estate planning. We should have a family meeting." "About what?" I asked. I was already suspicious. That careful tone. That's how Daniel sounded when he was approaching something legally sensitive. "About the trust, obviously. It's going to need restructuring. There might be tax implications." "I don't know anything about the trust," I said. "That's the thing, none of us really do, not specifically. Grandma handled everything herself, which honestly is not ideal, at her age, with her condition." "Are you saying the family should take control of her finances?" I asked. "I'm saying we should have proper legal oversight, for her own protection." I didn't like how that sounded. I didn't like how my brother sounded. I didn't like the implication. But I didn't have any power. That was the thing. I was the person with the least power in that family, the one with the lowest salary, the one with the smallest apartment, the one without a spouse or kids or visible success, the one they could dismiss. The meeting happened in early October. All 5 of us, my father, my mother, my Uncle Paul and his wife Susan, and me. We were in my father's office, around his mahogany conference table. My father had documents prepared, legal documents. He slid them across the table, with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 100 times before. Aliner has substantial assets, he began. More than we initially thought. Her investment portfolio, combined with her home equity, totals approximately $8,300,000. I felt my breath catch. My mother's eyes widened. She exchanged a look with Susan. Uncle Paul leaned forward. $8 million. My grandmother was living in a medical facility. She was wearing hospital gowns and eating pureed food, and she was worth $8 million. The issue, my father continued, is that Aliner set up her trust in 1987, 35 years ago. The provisions are outdated. The tax situation is problematic, and frankly, in her current condition, it's irresponsible to keep the assets configured the way they are. What are you suggesting? I asked. My father turned to Daniel. What we're suggesting, Daniel said, pulling out his pen. He was always pulling out his pen, always about to write something down. Is that we need someone with power of attorney, someone to manage her affairs, someone to make decisions that are in her best interest. She can make decisions, I said. She can't sign her name, my father replied, not unkindly. She can't leave her bed. She's had a catastrophic stroke, Sarah, be realistic. I understand that, but her mind is intact. She can understand things. She can express preferences. There was a silence. We need to protect the assets, my Uncle Paul said. He was quieter than my father, but he had the same look, the same certainty. Your father is suggesting that he take power of attorney. He's the eldest son. It's the logical choice. What does Aliner want? I asked. Aliner wants adequate care, my father said. Aliner wants to not bankrupt herself paying for medical bills. Aliner wants her family to manage her affairs intelligently. But he didn't actually know what Aliner wanted because he hadn't asked her. I knew because I'd asked her. I'd sat next to her bed after they left, after everyone had gone home, and I'd asked her. Her eyes had moved toward me. That was how she communicated now. Blinks and eye movements, blinks for yes, looks to the left for no. Do you want Dad to control your money? I'd asked her. One slow, deliberate blink. No. Do you want to decide about your own care? Another slow blink. Yes. Should I tell them? I asked. She blinked once hard, urgent. Yes. But when I told them, when I said, she says no, or rather, she indicated through her communication method that she doesn't want. My father had shut me down immediately. Sarah, your grandmother is experiencing serious medical trauma. Her judgment may be impaired. We can't base major legal decisions on eye movements and interpretations. I'm not interpreting, I said. She's communicating clearly. You're doing what a lot of well-meaning family members do, Daniel said, and he said it gently, which somehow made it worse. You're projecting what you want to hear onto ambiguous signals. It's a known phenomenon. We see it in elder law cases all the time. They were professionals. They were experienced. They were right, probably. I was just Sarah, the one with the little job and the little apartment. 3 weeks later, my father was named Aliner's legal power of attorney. The paperwork was filed. The decision was made. And that's when things started to get strange. Aliner's condition improved, slowly. 6 weeks of physical therapy, and she regained some movement in her arm. Her speech came back in fragments. By December, she could say 2-word sentences. By January, she could manage simple conversations. But my father was in control of her money. He started making changes immediately. For tax optimization, he told me, which was his answer for everything now. He transferred funds from her investment accounts to other accounts. He sold her commercial real estate holdings. He restructured her portfolio. He also started talking about her house. The Queen Anne property is too expensive to maintain, he told me at Christmas. We were at my parents' house, in their living room with the cathedral ceilings and the art collection worth more than Aliner's entire medical care. Property taxes alone are $8,000 a month. Insurance is another $2,000. Then there's maintenance, security, utilities. She might want to go back there, I said. "She's not going back," my father said. The tone was absolute. "Her mobility will never recover to that level. She'd be isolated in that house. It's not in her best interest." "It's her house," I said. "The one she's lived in for 50 years. "Yes, and it's a massive liability. I'm going to recommend we sell it." "Have you asked her?" My father looked at me like I'd asked something incomprehensible. "I don't need Alina's permission, Sarah. I have her power of attorney. I'm acting in her best interest. That's what a power of attorney means." "Except that's not what power of attorney means. A power of attorney is supposed to mean that you're acting for someone, not against them. You're supposed to respect their values, their wishes, their dignity." But I didn't say that. I never said that. That was my problem. I would realize later. I never said anything. Meanwhile, Alina was trapped. She was trapped in her bed at Harmony Gardens, in her hospital gown, with no way to communicate her wishes to anyone except me. And I had no power, no legal standing, no voice that anyone would listen to. "She's giving you money," my mother said to me in February. We were sitting in her gallery. It was evening after closing. I'd come to see her, thinking maybe if we were alone, away from my father's voice and his authority, she might help me. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your grandmother," she said, examining a painting on the wall, a Jackson Pollock or something that looked like one. "She's been giving you gifts, money. I've noticed the deposits in your account." She said it like an accusation. "She gives me $100 sometimes, for gas, for helping with her care." "Exactly," my mother said, turning to me. "Your father isn't aware that she's been doing this, and it's concerning. Because if Alina is giving money away without proper oversight, that's a sign that she's mentally compromised, that she can't manage her own affairs." I felt cold. Are you threatening to use that as evidence that she shouldn't have any autonomy?" "I'm saying," my mother said carefully, "that it would be better for everyone if Alina's financial situation remained stable, if no money was moving around, if everyone was on the same page." "The same page as who?" "As your father." She was warning me. She was making it clear that if I continued to let Alina give me money, if I continued to help Alina communicate her wishes, if I continued to be a problem, they would use it against Alina. They would use her love for me as evidence of her incompetence. I stopped going to see her for 3 weeks. I told myself it was work. I told myself I was busy. Really, I was terrified. When I finally went back, Alina was thinner. Her eyes were still sharp, but her face had sunk in somehow, as if she'd been disappearing without me there to witness it. I held her hand and apologized silently. But something had shifted in me. I started paying attention, really paying attention. I watched the way my father discussed Alina's care in family meetings, always framing things in terms of cost-benefit analysis. I listened to the way my Uncle Paul asked questions about her estate. I noticed the way my mother began referring to Alina in past tense, as if she were already gone. "Your grandmother was such a remarkable woman," Catherine would say, her hand on her chest. Alina was still alive. In March, I got access to Alina's bank statements. I told myself I was just checking to see if she needed anything. Really, I was trying to understand what my father had done. What I found made my hands shake. The house had been sold. Queen Anne property, listed at $2.2 million, sold in 15 days to a developer who immediately announced plans to demolish the existing structure and build luxury condos. The proceeds, approximately $2 million after fees and taxes, had been moved into an account in my father's name. Technically, it was in a trust, but he was the trustee. The investments had been liquidated. $800,000 in mutual funds, $600,000 in bonds gone, redirected. My father's explanation, when I saw it documented, was fee management and diversification. But when I looked at where the money went, a lot of it had gone into my father's own companies. He'd loaned it to himself, essentially, from Alina's trust to Richard's real estate ventures. It was legal, maybe, but it was wrong. And it was happening because Alina was silent. Because she couldn't defend herself. Because she had one grandchild who loved her, and that grandchild had been threatened into silence. I sat in my apartment that night and cried. Actually cried, tears running down my face, feeling like I was betraying the only person in my family who had ever really seen me. But I also felt something else. I felt anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold kind. The kind that builds slowly, like frost accumulating on a window, making the world outside progressively harder to see. I made a decision that night. I was going to get evidence, all of it, every transaction, every document, every piece of proof that my father had mismanaged Alina's trust. And I was going to figure out how to use it. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped being the weak one. That was the moment I decided to fight back. But I couldn't let anyone know. I became invisible. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. I changed my behavior so subtly that no one in my family noticed anything different about me. I stopped complaining. I stopped defending myself. I stopped being the difficult one who asked uncomfortable questions. When my father talked about Alina's finances, I nodded. When my mother made cutting remarks about my apartment or my job, I smiled and said nothing. When my brother talked about restructuring the trust, I pretended to accept his explanations. I became the person they thought I already was, the quiet one, the one without opinions, the one who wouldn't cause problems. It was easier than I expected. Because the truth is, people don't pay attention to you when you're not demanding attention. I'd spent my entire life trying to prove I was worth paying attention to. I'd been exhausting myself with it. The moment I stopped trying, I became visible for the first time in a different way. Not as Sarah who needed to be taken seriously, but as Sarah the reliable one. Sarah who checked on Grandma. Sarah who didn't make a fuss. Sarah who could be trusted. Sarah who could be left alone in Alina's hospital room. That was the opening I needed. The first thing I did was gather information. Just information. Nothing illegal, nothing that would hurt anyone, just facts. I kept records of Alina's medical visits. I documented which doctors my father chose, and I noticed he always chose the ones who said her condition was permanently compromised, the ones who agreed with him that she'd never recover enough to manage her own affairs. I recorded the dates she showed improvement and the treatment protocols that had led to that improvement. I compiled a timeline. I also started visiting Alina when my father's office hours overlapped with her facility's visiting hours. I'd sit with her for hours, sometimes not even talking, just existing in her presence. And I'd watch her move. I'd notice the way her left hand, the stroke side, was gradually becoming stronger. By April, she could lift her hand off the bed and hold mine with real pressure. By May, she could form complete sentences, slowly, with effort, but intelligible. Her mind had never left. Only her voice had been trapped. "He's stealing," she said to me one afternoon. We were alone. Everyone was always surprised to see me, so they never bothered to stick around. They couldn't see that Alina was becoming sharper, more present, every single week. "I know," I said. "Can you prove it?" Each word cost her energy. Her jaw trembled with the effort. "I'm working on it," I said. "Don't talk, save your strength." But she grabbed my hand. The grip was weak, but it was determined. "I saw it coming," she said. "Before the stroke, I knew he wanted the money." "How?" "A mother knows her son," she said. "She knows when ambition turns into greed. I prepared for this. Sarah, I prepared." "What do you mean?" She closed her eyes, exhausted, but she pulled my hand to her chest, over her heart. "I have insurance," she said. "Proof." And then she was asleep. The effort of speaking had knocked her out. I drove home that night with my mind racing. Insurance, proof, what did that mean? It took me 2 weeks to figure it out. Alina had always been meticulous. She'd saved every document, every bank statement, every investment prospectus. Everything was in her house, or it had been before my father sold it. But he'd sold the house to a developer. That developer was planning to demolish it in June. I had to move fast. I called the developer's office, pretending to be a historical preservation researcher. I asked if there was any possibility of accessing the house before demolition for documentation purposes. I explained that the Queen Anne mansion had significant architectural history. The contractor I spoke to was surprisingly sympathetic. He said I had 1 week. He was clearing out the house anyway. If I wanted to come grab anything before the wreck crew arrived, I was welcome. I took a day off work. I drove to Seattle, and I let myself into my grandmother's house. My grandmother's house, though technically it wasn't anymore, with the old key that a leaner had given me years ago. The place was empty. The furniture was gone. The paintings were gone. Even the light fixtures had been removed. But the built-ins were still there. The cabinets, the shelves, the hidden spaces that a house this old, this carefully constructed would have. Alina had trusted me to understand. I found the first cash in the pantry, in a space behind the false wall that concealed the old ice box. Documents in a plastic bin, original trust documents, photographs of documents, bank statements, a handwritten ledger in Alina's meticulous handwriting, dating back 30 years. I found more in the attic in an old steamer trunk. Letters, correspondence with lawyers, records of investments, proof of every asset she owned and where it had gone. And at the very bottom, in a sealed envelope with my name on it, I found the insurance policy. It was a letter. "Dear Sarah," it began in Alina's careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I can't protect myself anymore. It means you're the only one who can. What you're holding is everything you need to know the truth about our family, about what your father has done, about what he's capable of doing. I'm writing this because I know you, Sarah. I know that you'll be the one who understands, who cares enough to act. This is not your burden, but if you choose to carry it, you'll be carrying it with my blessing." The letter went on, page after page. Alina had documented everything. She'd been suspecting my father for years. She'd been documenting his financial maneuvering, his manipulation, his attempts to gain control of her assets. She'd been waiting for him to make his move. And when the stroke came, when he saw his opportunity, she was ready. She'd been leaving me breadcrumbs the whole time. I gathered everything, every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. I filled 7 bankers' boxes and I carried them to my car. As I was locking the house for the last time, I thought about Alina, about her hands, about the strength underneath the fragility. She'd been planning this from the beginning. And now it was my turn. I rented a storage unit in Portland, climate-controlled, secure. I photographed everything in Alina's cache, every document, every page. I created digital backups. I organized the evidence chronologically. And then I did what should have happened from the beginning. I hired a lawyer. Not from my family's law firm, not Daniel's firm, someone completely independent. A woman named Michelle Torres, who specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. I met with her on a Tuesday evening after work. I brought carefully selected documents, nothing too incriminating, nothing that would shock her into the kind of reaction that might make her report me, and I explained the situation. She listened, without interrupting, for 45 minutes. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. She had this expression on her face. It was the expression of someone who'd seen this before, many times. "How much?" she asked. "What?" "Approximately how much money are we talking about?" $8.3 million, I said. "That we know about." She nodded slowly. "And your father has been president of her trust for how long?" "Since October, 6 months. In 6 months, he's liquidated the investment portfolio, sold the primary residence, and restructured the remaining assets under his name." "Yes." She set her pen down on her legal pad. "Sarah, what your father has done isn't just theft. It's elder financial abuse. It may also constitute fraud. Depending on the specific language of the trust, there could be criminal liability." I felt sick. "What do we do?" I asked. "First, we need to verify everything. I need to get my forensic accountant involved. Second, we need to determine what Alina's stated wishes are. her documented wishes, not what she might say today, but what she explicitly directed, in writing, before the stroke. "She left me a letter," I said. "That's good. That's very good. Do you have it?" I did. I'd kept it in a waterproof envelope, along with copies of everything else. Michelle read the letter 3 times. By the 3rd reading, I could see her jaw was set. "This is explicit," she said. "Alina clearly anticipated this scenario. She clearly didn't want your father controlling her affairs, and she clearly wanted you to have this information. So what's the legal strategy? We're going to petition the court to remove your father as trustee. We're going to demand a full accounting of his transactions. We're going to investigate whether those transactions were within the scope of his authority as defined by the trust document. And we're going to pursue restitution." "How long will that take?" "Months, maybe longer. Discovery alone could take 4 months. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This won't be a surprise to your father. The moment we file, he'll know that Alina's been communicating with a lawyer. He'll know that there's evidence." "He already suspects," I said. "I think. My mother warned me that Alina was giving me money. That could be seen as evidence." Michelle leaned back. "Here's what I think is happening," she said. "I think your father sees your grandmother as a resource to be extracted. I think he made his play, thinking he'd be able to move the money and restructure the assets before anyone could stop him. I think he assumed Alina wouldn't recover enough to be a problem. And I think he definitely assumed that you wouldn't be smart enough or brave enough to challenge him." She said it gently, but it was clear. "We're going to prove him wrong," she said, "but we have to be smart about it, smarter than he is." "What do I need to do?" "Keep your normal life exactly as it is. Go to work. See your family. Don't let on that anything has changed. Don't contact your father about Alina's care. In fact, I want you to step back from Alina a little bit. Reduce your visits. It'll make him more confident, make him think you've given up." "I can't abandon her." "You're not. You're protecting her. There's a difference." Over the next month, I followed Michelle's instructions exactly. I reduced my visits to Alina to once every 2 weeks. When I did visit, I was distant, preoccupied. I made small talk. I talked about work. I didn't ask her about her care or her wishes or anything that would suggest I was still fighting for her. It worked. My father's guard dropped. The tension in the family eased. "I think Sarah's finally accepting reality," I overheard my mother tell him during a Christmas dinner phone call. I was in the kitchen, pretending not to listen, while they talked in the living room. "She's a smart girl," my father said. "She just needed time to understand that this is beyond her capability, that some things require a different level of expertise." I gripped the edge of the counter and said nothing. Meanwhile, Michelle's forensic accountant was tearing through the financial records. He was finding things that even Alina hadn't documented. He was finding patterns of transfer, shell companies, accounts in places that Michelle said were unusual for a man of your father's status. "I think he's been planning this for a while," she told me. "I don't think the stroke was the catalyst. I think the stroke was just the opportunity. He's probably been positioning himself to take control of Alina's assets for years." By February, we had everything we needed. The case was airtight. Michelle kept using that phrase. Airtight? It meant there was no way out for my father, no explanation that would hold up, no defense that would survive scrutiny. All we needed was Alina's testimony and signature. "Can she do it?" Michelle asked. "Can she testify?" I visited Alina the following Sunday. She was stronger now. The stroke had faded to a limp and a slight slur in her speech. She was using a walker. She was eating solid food. The physical therapy had been aggressive and successful because I'd insisted on it, logging the requests in her file, getting her doctors to document the improvement. Now, 3 months after my father had assumed power of attorney, Alina was more functional than she'd been a month after the stroke. He'd made a mistake. He'd assumed she'd never recover, and in that assumption, he'd underestimated her. He'd underestimated both of us. "I need you to sign something," I told her. We were in the facility's garden, private, away from cameras. "Court order," I said. It wasn't a question. She understood what was happening. Yes. She squeezed my hand. I've been waiting for you to be ready, she said. I'm ready, I said. Are you? She looked out at the garden. At the roses, the azaleas, the carefully manicured landscape that she would never tend with her own hands again. He came to see me last week, she said slowly. My father. He said he wanted to talk about my care, but really, he wanted to talk about the house. He wanted to tell me how smart he'd been, how he'd sold it just in time before property values dropped, how he'd made good decisions with my money. Aliner's hands were shaking, not from weakness, from rage. He told me he'd quadrupled my investment returns. He pulled up charts on his laptop. He showed me the gains. He was so proud, Sarah. He was actually proud, as if he'd done something noble instead of stealing from his own mother. He doesn't see it as stealing, I said. I know, Aliner said. That's what makes it worse. He's convinced himself that he's helping me, that his theft is actually duty. She turned to look at me. Sign whatever papers you need to sign. Do whatever you need to do. And Sarah, when this is over, when you've won, don't let him convince you that you're the villain. That's what he'll do. He'll rewrite the entire story. He'll make it seem like you're the one who hurt the family. Don't believe him. How do you know he'll do that? Because, Aliner said, I've known him his whole life, and I've known that he was capable of this his whole life. I just prayed I was wrong. Michelle prepared a document for Aliner to sign. It was a sworn statement, witnessed by her doctor and notarized, in which Aliner explicitly revoked my father's power of attorney and appointed Michelle Torres as her legal guardian for financial and medical decisions. Aliner signed it without hesitation. Michelle filed it the following Monday. And that was when everything exploded. My father's phone call came on Tuesday morning. I was at work. I was in a meeting about the spring marketing campaign. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. He called again, 3 more times in 15 minutes. I excused myself from the meeting and called him back. What have you done? He said, not a question. I don't know what you mean. Someone has filed legal action against me. My lawyer called me this morning. Aliner's supposed guardian has filed a petition to remove me as trustee and investigate my management of her assets. I see, I said. Did you do this, Sarah? Did you somehow involve yourself in your grandmother's legal affairs? Aliner involved herself, I said quietly. She signed the documentation. She's the one who decided. Aliner can't make coherent decisions. We've established that. Her judgment is impaired. And whatever you've done, whatever you've convinced her to sign, it's not going to matter. It won't hold up in court. We'll see, I said. No, he said, and his voice was different now. It was cold. You won't see anything. You know why? Because I have documentation that Aliner was mentally incompetent when she signed those papers. I have medical records. I have testimony from her doctors. I have a comprehensive case for why her recent decisions are suspect. My stomach dropped. What documentation? I asked. The medication she was on, the dosages, the side effects. One of those medications is known to cause confusion and impaired judgment. Coincidentally, she was taking that medication when she signed your little petition. She was taking that medication because of the stroke. Exactly, which is why we can't trust any decisions she made while under its influence. The medication was prescribed by her doctors. It's a standard treatment. Sarah, listen to me. His voice was gentler now, which somehow made it worse. I'm not angry with you. I understand that you love Aliner, that you were trying to do what you thought was right, but you're out of your depth. You've involved yourself in something that's going to destroy you, and I'm going to prove that you manipulated a vulnerable woman into signing documents that she didn't understand. He hung up. I stood in the hallway, outside the conference room, and shook. He had a case. He had a real case. And unless we had counter-evidence, unless we could prove that Aliner was competent when she signed the petition, that she understood what she was signing, he was going to win. I called Michelle immediately. She was already aware of the filing. My father's lawyers had sent over their counter-petition that morning. It's a strong defense, she admitted. Elder care litigation is complicated. Competency is complicated. Can we win? Maybe, if we have video evidence of Alina being interviewed by an independent neurologist. If that neurologist can testify that she was competent and understood the implications of the documents she was signing. If we can establish a timeline that the medication side effects wouldn't have been significant at the moment of signing. Can we get that? The neurologist part, yes. I can arrange for an independent evaluation. But we need to do it soon, and we need to do it while Alina is in the best possible mental state. How soon? Today, if possible. The neurologist was Dr. Catherine Chen, a specialist in elder care and stroke recovery. She was thorough, expensive, and according to Michelle, the best in the region. She met with Alina that afternoon. I wasn't allowed in the room. That was crucial. There couldn't be any suggestion that I'd coached Alina or influenced her responses. The evaluation took 3 hours. Alina was patient, meticulous. She answered every question, performed every cognitive test, told every story. When it was done, Dr. Chen asked to speak with me. "Your grandmother is remarkably sharp," she said. "I'll be frank with you. I've seen many patients at her stage of recovery, and most of them wouldn't be capable of understanding complex legal documents. Your grandmother isn't one of them. Will you testify to that?" "I will. I'll provide a written report documenting her cognitive function, her comprehension, her ability to understand the implications of her decisions. My assessment is that she was and is completely competent." "What about the medication my father mentioned? The one that affects judgment?" Dr. Chen smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Your father mentioned that to me, actually. He called my office yesterday. He was very friendly, very respectful. He explained that Alina was on a medication that could impair judgment. He asked me to note that in my report." "And?" I asked, barely breathing. "And I noted it. And I also reviewed the specific medication, the dosage, the timing, and the research on its side effects. It's true that the medication can cause confusion in some patients, but Alina has been on that medication for 6 weeks, and the dose has been stable for 3 weeks. Her body has adjusted, and more importantly, there's no indication in her medical history that she's experienced any cognitive side effects. In fact, her cognitive function has improved significantly over the past month." "How did my father know about the medication?" "I have no idea," Dr. Chen said, "but I would guess that he's done his homework. He's prepared for this lawsuit, and he's building a narrative." But there was a flaw in the narrative. There was one thing my father hadn't counted on. Alina kept a journal. She'd started it after the stroke when her speech came back. It was a way to practice her writing, to keep her mind sharp. She wrote in it every day in her careful, somewhat shaky handwriting. And in those journals, she documented her cognitive function, her thoughts, her understanding of her financial situation, her decisions. There was an entry from the day she signed the petition with Michelle. "Today I took control of my life again. I understood every word of the petition. I understood what it means. I am clear. I am sane. I am lucid. I know my son wants to steal from me. I know my granddaughter is trying to help me. I know this court proceeding will be difficult. But I am not confused. I am not impaired. I am, for the first time since my stroke, completely myself." Michelle read that entry and smiled. "We're going to win," she said. But my father didn't know that yet. He was still in the narrative stage, where he was building his case, gathering his evidence, preparing his witnesses. And I was still invisible. Or so I thought. The court date was set for March 14th. My father didn't speak to me in the month leading up to it. He called my apartment once, and I didn't pick up. He sent an email asking me to drop the lawsuit and stop trying to destroy your family. I didn't respond. My mother called me crying one night and said, "How could you betray us like this?" I said, "I'm not betraying anyone. I'm protecting Grandma." "Your father is a good man," she said. "He's trying to help your grandmother, and you're making him look like a criminal." "He is a criminal," I said quietly. She hung up. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my apartment listening to the rain and thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. My father had hired an entire legal team. He had resources. He had credibility. What did I have? A storage unit full of documents, a grandmother who could barely walk, and the truth. The truth, I'd learned, was not always enough. The courthouse was in Seattle, in a modern building downtown. I arrived an hour early. Alina was already there, with Michelle and a caretaker to help her navigate the building. She looked small in her wheelchair, but her eyes were clear. My father arrived with Daniel and his legal team, 3 lawyers, all in expensive suits, all carrying leather briefcases. He looked shocked to see me, as if he hadn't actually expected me to show up. "Sarah," he said, as if we were passing at a cocktail party, "I'm surprised you have time to be here. I know your work schedule is quite busy." I said nothing. The hearing lasted 6 hours. The judge was a woman named Patricia Hoffman. She was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She didn't take notes. She just listened. My father's lawyer went first. He presented the narrative. Alina had suffered a catastrophic stroke. Her judgment had been compromised. My father, as a loving son, had taken control of her financial affairs to protect her. Everything he'd done was within his authority as trustee and was in Alina's best interest. He presented evidence of Alina's initial confusion, medical records from immediately after the stroke, testimony from her initial care team. Then he presented evidence of the medication, the possibility of impaired judgment. He called Alina's initial neurologist to testify that she had been confused in those early weeks. It all sounded very reasonable. Then Michelle presented her case. She presented the original trust document. She presented Alina's explicit letter, written before the stroke, expressing her wishes about her assets. She presented the documents Alina had hidden, showing that she'd anticipated exactly this scenario. She presented Dr. Chen, who testified that Alina was competent and understood everything she'd signed. She presented Alina's journal entries. And then she called Alina to testify. It was probably the bravest thing I've ever seen. Alina wheeled herself to the witness stand. The caretaker helped her, but Alina insisted on taking the oath herself. She placed her hand on the Bible and promised to tell the truth. Her voice was shaky, but it was clear. The questions Michelle asked were gentle, designed to show Alina's comprehension and clarity. "Can you tell the court what your primary residence was?" Michelle asked. "The house on Queen Anne Hill," Alina said. "I lived there for 52 years. My husband and I bought it in 1970. "And what happened to that house?" "My son sold it, without asking me. He said it was too expensive to maintain, but I didn't want to sell it. He sold it anyway because he had power of attorney." "How did that make you feel?" Michelle asked. "It made me feel like I was dead," Alina said. "Like he was dividing up my life like I wasn't a person anymore, like I was just a collection of assets to be managed." There was silence in the courtroom. Then my father's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. "Ms. Mitchell-Chen, you've suffered a serious stroke, correct?" "Yes," Alina said. "And immediately after that stroke, you were confused, correct? You didn't recognize people. You couldn't communicate. You couldn't understand conversations." "That's true," Alina said, "for about the first week. And you were on medication that is known to cause confusion." "I was, but I recovered. The confusion lasted about 10 days. Then I came back to myself." "How do you know you came back to yourself? How do you know your thinking is normal, rather than impaired in ways you can't perceive?" Alina looked directly at the lawyer. "I know because I remember who I am," she said. "I remember my life. I remember the mistakes my son has made. I remember that my granddaughter loves me, and I remember that my son has always been ambitious in a way that frightened me. I remember thinking when I was younger that if I wasn't careful, this ambition would turn into greed. I was right." "That's not an answer to my question," the lawyer said. "Yes, it is," Alina said. "It's the only answer that matters. I'm not confused about who I am. I'm not confused about what my son did, and I'm not confused about what I want." My father's lawyer had no follow-up questions. The judge took a 2-hour recess. Then she came back with her ruling. "I find that Alina Mitchell-Chen is competent," she said. "I find that her decisions regarding the revocation of power of attorney and the appointment of a new guardian are valid and binding. I hereby remove Richard Mitchell as trustee and appoint Michelle Torres in his place. Furthermore, I'm ordering a complete forensic accounting of Richard Mitchell's management of the trust assets. During the period of his trusteeship, he liquidated assets totaling $7.1 million, moved those assets into accounts in his own name, and made loans from those accounts to his own companies. These transactions require investigation and potential restitution." She banged her gavel. "This court is adjourned." I watched my father's face. I watched the moment the reality of it set in. He'd lost. It was over. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not joy. Relief wasn't what I felt either. What I felt was the quiet, deep satisfaction of someone who'd done the impossible thing, who'd been underestimated and had proven everyone wrong. I was still Sarah, still the quiet one, still the one with the little apartment and the little job. But I was no longer powerless. The financial investigation took 4 months. The forensic accountant Michelle hired found everything. Every hidden transfer, every shell company, every personal loan that had never been repaid. By August, the accounting was complete. Richard Mitchell had misappropriated $4.2 million from Alina's trust in less than a year. The district attorney opened a criminal investigation. I watched it unfold from the outside. I didn't go to the police. I didn't make statements. I didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself. The charges came in September: wire fraud, theft, elder financial abuse, breach of fiduciary duty. My father's lawyer announced a plea deal. My father would return all the money, with penalties and interest. He would face 5 years of probation. His name would go on a registry of people who'd committed financial crimes against elders. He didn't go to prison. That was the part that stung a little. Money, it turns out, could buy you a better class of legal defense. But he lost his reputation. His business partners began quietly distancing themselves. One of his companies filed for bankruptcy. The news outlets in Seattle covered the story for weeks. "Wealthy businessman exploits elderly mother," the headlines read. He'd wanted to be important. He got famous instead, but not in the way he wanted. My mother called me in October. "Your father has had a heart attack," she said flatly. "He's at Swedish Medical Center. The doctors are saying he may not recover." "Is he okay?" I asked. The question felt bizarre, like something I was supposed to ask, even though I didn't care. "They're not sure," my mother said. "Can you come?" I drove to Seattle that evening. Richard Mitchell was in the cardiac care unit, in a private room, with tubes coming out of his arms. His color was gray. He looked smaller than I remembered. I sat next to his bed while he slept. I tried to feel something: sympathy, regret, forgiveness, the thing I was supposed to feel. All I felt was tired. He woke up later that night. He saw me sitting there and his eyes widened. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse from intubation. "Hi, Dad," I said. "I'm sorry," he said, just like that. "I'm sorry for what I did." I believed him, not because he meant it, but because he was frightened. He was facing his own mortality, and suddenly, the financial games didn't seem as important. "I know," I said. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. I thought about Alina, about her hands, about her dignity being stolen while she couldn't stop it, about me standing on the outside, watching my family destroy itself. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not today." He recovered from the heart attack. The doctors said it was a warning, a wake-up call. He's on multiple medications now. His doctor told him he needs to reduce stress. The fraud case is still ongoing. It'll probably take another year to resolve everything. Alina is home now, not back in the Queen Anne house. That's gone, a parking garage now where it used to be. But she bought a smaller place, a condo with an ocean view. She uses a walker, but she walks. She still can't use her left hand the way she used to, but the physical therapist says the improvement is remarkable. They said you'd plateau, I told her once. People tell you a lot of things you can't do, she said. You have to prove them wrong. She didn't say it to be profound. She was just stating a fact. The money that my father stole came back, with interest and penalties. The amount added up to nearly $12 million. Alina donated most of it to a charity for elder financial abuse. She set up a foundation that provides free legal help to seniors who have been exploited. What about your share? I asked her once. Of what? She said. Of the money, of the inheritance. Sarah, I don't need any of it. I have everything I need. You, on the other hand, you've earned something. She left me $400,000 in her will, not in a trust, not with conditions, just mine, outright. I cried when I found out. That's not why I did this, I told her. I know, she said. That's why I can give it to you. It's been 8 months since the court hearing. I'm still working at the same company. I still live in the same apartment, though I'm thinking about buying something now. A house, maybe, something with a garden. My father doesn't call me. My mother sends Christmas cards, but they're perfunctory. My brother stopped coming to family events. We fractured my family. That was the consequence of all this. I didn't just win against my father. I destroyed the structure that held us together. Some days I feel guilty about that. Most days I don't. Alina and I have tea every Sunday. It takes me 3 hours to drive there, but I don't mind. She tells me stories about the war, about my great-grandmother, the nurse, about the women who raised her to be strong. You know what the hardest part was? She asked me last week. What? I said. Not being angry. After the stroke, when I realized what your father was doing, I wanted to rage at him. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My voice was gone, so I had to just lie there and watch. That was the real torture, not the stroke, the helplessness. But you weren't helpless, I said. You prepared, you left me the evidence. Because I knew you'd act, she said. I knew you had it in you. You just needed to know you had it in you too. There's a quiet power to that. The kind of power that doesn't announce itself. That doesn't need validation or recognition. The kind of power that Alina always had. The kind I was always capable of. I just had to believe it first. My father has been released from probation as of last month. He's supposed to be taking it easy, focusing on his health. According to my mother, he's moved to Spokane, away from Seattle's social circles, where people knew what he'd done. I haven't seen him since that day in the hospital. And I don't think I will. That chapter is closed. What's open now is a different kind of story. The one where I'm not the quiet, underestimated one anymore. The one where I know my own power. I still live quietly. I still don't make a fuss. But now it's by choice. There's a difference. Alina used to say that the strongest people are the ones nobody notices. The ones who are patient. The ones who watch and wait and plan. Most people have no idea what they're capable of, she told me, because they never have to prove it. The ones who know, they're the dangerous ones, not because they're loud or aggressive, but because they're quiet. I think about that a lot now. I think about how the underestimated become the unstoppable. How the person you think is weak might be the one who knows all your secrets. How revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the slow, steady accumulation of proof. Sometimes it's just a woman in a wheelchair, testifying about who she really is. Sometimes it's the moment when someone finally realizes they were wrong about you all along. And sometimes, the sweetest victory is knowing that everyone will remember the moment they misjudged you. Not because you told them to, but because the evidence left no room for doubt. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I was the quiet one. I was the one they dismissed. I was the one who had nothing to prove. And then I proved everything.